It wasn't just a battle of survival, it felt like a race between illness and self-destruction, each threatening to win first. And yet, what people remember most about Kathleen Turner isn't the struggle, but the voice. Low, smoky, and unhurried, a voice that could silence a room and linger long after she spoke. When she burst onto Hollywood screens in the early 1980s, she didn't just arrive, she seized attention, redefining what a leading woman could be with a presence both seductive and dangerous. Then, almost as quickly as she rose, she seemed to vanish, leaving behind questions, rumors, and a sense of unfinished mystery. Born Mary Kathleen Turner on June 19, 1954, in Springfield, Missouri, her early life was anything but ordinary. The daughter of a U.S. Foreign Service diplomat, she spent her childhood moving across continents, Canada, Cuba, Venezuela, and eventually London, absorbing cultures but never quite settling in one place. As the third of 4 children, and the only one born in the United States, she grew up in a strict, conservative household where ambition in acting wasn't just discouraged, it was quietly condemned. Her father, rooted in a deeply traditional background, viewed the theater as something dangerously close to disgrace, a belief that cast a long shadow over her earliest dreams. And yet, beneath that restraint, something was already forming, a quiet defiance, a pull toward the stage that refused to disappear. Long before the fame, before the fall, before the mystery, there was a young girl moving from country to country, carrying a voice the world hadn't yet heard, but would never forget. Even in her earliest performances, there was already tension shaping Kathleen Turner's path. While she stood on stage in school productions, her father refused to watch, driving her mother to the theater but waiting outside in the car, as if distancing himself from something he could not accept. At intermission, her mother would step out to update him, a quiet ritual that said everything about the divide in their family. But something shifted when they moved to London. At the American School in London, surrounded by the energy of West End productions and the discipline of British theatre, Kathleen didn't just perform, she began to understand. What had once been a forbidden interest hardened into a clear, undeniable ambition. Then, just as that ambition was taking shape, tragedy struck. 1 week before her graduation in 1972, her father died suddenly of a coronary thrombosis in Hampstead. He was only 52. Kathleen was 17. His death marked a turning point, both an emotional fracture and a strange kind of release. Afterward, the family returned to the United States, and Kathleen moved forward with a determination that now carried the weight of loss. She began at Southwest Missouri State University before transferring to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, earning her Bachelor of Fine Arts in 1977. Her earlier training at the Central School of Speech and Drama had already given her a foundation, but now she had something sharper: purpose. With a degree in hand and ambition that refused to be contained, she headed to New York City, a place that, in 1977, was as unforgiving as it was alive. The streets were rough, the city struggling, but the theater scene pulsed with opportunity. It wasn't long before Kathleen found her way in. Within months, she stepped into the female lead of a production, not as a hopeful outsider anymore, but as someone ready to claim her place. The question was no longer whether she would make it, but how far she was willing to go. Her early career moved quickly, almost quietly, as Kathleen Turner began carving out a place for herself on stage. At the Soho Repertory Theatre, she took on a role alongside a then-unknown Jonathan Frakes, long before he would become widely recognized as Commander Riker on Star Trek: The Next Generation. Not long after, she stepped onto Broadway in Gemini, performed at what is now the Helen Hayes Theatre. At the same time, she secured a steady role on the NBC daytime soap The Doctors, playing Nola Dancy Aldrich from 1978 to 1979. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was consistent, paying the bills while keeping her visible, sharpening her presence in front of the camera. Everything seemed to be building toward something bigger. That turning point came in 1981, when director Lawrence Kasdan began casting his first feature film, the neo-noir thriller Body Heat. The role of Maddie Walker demanded more than just beauty. It required a dangerous mix of control, seduction, and emotional precision. She had to be convincing enough to draw a man into obsession, and cold enough to destroy him. Kathleen Turner was chosen. When Body Heat premiered in August 1981, the impact was immediate. Audiences didn't just notice her, they were pulled in, caught off guard by a presence that felt both classic and entirely new. In a single performance, she didn't just arrive in Hollywood. She transformed herself into an icon almost overnight. Critics and audiences were equally captivated by what Kathleen Turner brought to the screen. Her portrayal of Mattie Walker wasn't secondary or decorative. She was the driving force of Body Heat, the character around whom everything revolved. There was nothing tentative about her presence. The husky, unmistakable voice, the quiet confidence in her movements, and the sharp intelligence behind every glance. She didn't ease her way into Hollywood. She arrived complete, as if she had always belonged there. Recognition followed quickly. Publications like Empire would later rank her among the 100 sexiest stars in film history, while the New York Times noted that her career was built on bold choices and an unapologetic, grounded sensuality. Unlike many rising actors, she skipped the long climb through minor roles and stepped directly into leading status. What came next was a streak of success throughout the 1980s that few could rival, marked by versatility, critical acclaim, and undeniable box office appeal. By 1983, she showed a completely different side opposite Steve Martin in The Man with Two Brains, proving she could match comedic timing with ease. A year later, she took on darker material in Crimes of Passion, before landing one of her most defining roles in Romancing the Stone. Directed by Robert Zemeckis and starring alongside Michael Douglas and Danny DeVito, the film became a major commercial success. As Joan Wilder, a sheltered romance novelist suddenly thrown into a dangerous jungle adventure, Turner connected instantly with audiences, proving she wasn't just a star, she was a phenomenon. The momentum didn't slow, it intensified. Kathleen Turner earned a Golden Globe for her performance in Romancing the Stone, cementing her place as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. In 1985, she returned in The Jewel of the Nile, the highly anticipated sequel, while also taking on a very different role in John Huston's Prizzi's Honor. Acting alongside Jack Nicholson and Angelica Houston, she delivered a sharp, darkly comedic performance that earned her yet another Golden Globe, proving her range extended far beyond adventure and romance. Then came 1986, often seen as the height of her artistic power. In Peggy Sue Got Married, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, Turner took on a role that demanded subtlety and emotional depth. She played a woman who collapses at a high school reunion, only to awaken decades earlier in her own teenage life. The performance was layered, nostalgic, and quietly devastating, earning her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress and solidifying her reputation as more than just a screen presence, but a serious dramatic force. That same year, she added another unforgettable role, this time using only her voice. As Jessica Rabbit in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Turner created one of the most iconic animated characters in film history. Incredibly, she recorded the role while 9 months pregnant, even going into labor on the final day of production. Soon after, she welcomed her daughter, Rachel Ann Weisz, born on October 14, 1987. By 1988, Turner returned to the screen in The Accidental Tourist, starring alongside William Hurt. Adapted from the novel by Ann Tyler, the film offered a quieter, more restrained role, once again revealing that her strength as an actress lay not just in commanding attention, but in knowing exactly when to hold it back. By the end of the decade, Kathleen Turner had proven she could inhabit almost any role an adult drama demanded. In 1989, she closed out an extraordinary run with The War of the Roses, reuniting once again with Michael Douglas and Danny DeVito. The film was a brutal, dark comedy centered on a marriage unraveling into all-out conflict, and Turner's performance, playing a former gymnast fiercely determined to claim her home over her husband, was as sharp as it was unsettling. Critics, including the New York Times, praised the trio extensively, recognizing the film as a bold and fitting capstone to her dominance throughout the 1980s. It was a decade in which she seemed to be everywhere, moving effortlessly between adventure, comedy, drama, noir, animation, and satire, and excelling in every genre she touched. By that point, there was little debate left. Kathleen Turner wasn't just successful, she was one of the biggest stars in the world, a level of recognition and influence that only a select few in any generation ever truly reach. Amid that soaring career, her personal life was also taking shape. In 1984, at the height of her early fame, she married Jay Weiss, a New York-based real estate developer. Their story began almost by chance. She had been looking to buy an apartment, and he happened to own the property. What started as a business interaction quickly turned into something more personal, culminating in a memorable proposal right in the middle of 2nd Avenue, where he went down on one knee, turning an ordinary city street into the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Kathleen Turner and Jay Weiss were married in a Reformed Jewish ceremony at Central Synagogue, marking the beginning of a partnership that would last more than 2 decades. Though Kathleen never formally converted, she embraced many Jewish traditions and chose to raise their daughter, Rachel, within the faith. Their marriage endured for 23 years, ending in 2007, but the bond between them didn't disappear with the divorce. Turner would later describe Jay as her best friend, and the two remained close, sharing regular lunches and continuing to support their daughter together, often sitting side by side at her musical performances. At the same time, Turner's reputation in Hollywood was evolving in a very different direction. By the late 1980s, she had become known as a powerful and uncompromising presence on set, someone who spoke her mind and refused to dilute her opinions. For some, that strength translated into difficulty. Eileen Atkins once described her as an amazing nightmare, while the New York Times went as far as to label her a certifiable diva. It was a perception shaped as much by her personality as by the expectations placed upon her. Looking back, Turner herself acknowledged that there was truth in those criticisms. She admitted that during those years, she hadn't always been kind, but she also understood the environment she was navigating. As a woman at the peak of a demanding and often unforgiving industry, she faced pressures that left little room for softness, especially for someone unwilling to be accommodating. It was a contradiction she recognized clearly. The very qualities that made her magnetic on screen, her confidence, her control, her refusal to shrink, were the same traits that made her seem difficult behind the scenes. By the early 1990s, Kathleen Turner was still firmly an A-list star, seemingly untouchable after a decade of dominance. But beneath that success, something was beginning to shift, quietly at first, then all at once. The strength and confidence she had built over the years were no match for what was coming next. It wasn't a scandal or a career misstep. It was something far more insidious, something she couldn't outwork or outmaneuver. In 1992, while filming V.I. Warshawski, a detective thriller that ultimately failed to make an impact, Turner began experiencing strange, unexplainable symptoms, persistent pain, sudden fevers, and a growing sense that something in her body wasn't right. True to form, she pushed through it. She even performed her own stunts during filming, at one point breaking her nose, refusing to slow down despite the warning signs. But the pain didn't fade. It spread, intensified, and became impossible to ignore. The answer finally came in 1993, rheumatoid arthritis. A chronic autoimmune condition, it causes the body to attack its own joints, leading to severe pain and physical deterioration. By the time she was diagnosed, Turner had already been suffering for over a year. The effects were devastating. Simple movements became difficult, even turning her head or walking required effort. For someone whose presence had always been defined by control and physical confidence, it marked the beginning of a battle unlike anything she had ever faced. The diagnosis came with a warning that was almost as devastating as the illness itself. Doctors told Kathleen Turner that she might one day need a wheelchair. She was only 38. The progression of rheumatoid arthritis was especially brutal in her right wrist, so sensitive that even the slightest touch could trigger unbearable pain. There was no escape from it. Sitting, standing, lying down, nothing offered relief. The pain was constant, invasive, and exhausting. As Turner later described it, "It will not kill you, but it kills your life." What made it even more devastating was how deeply it attacked the very core of who she was. The physicality that had defined her on screen, her strength, her movement, her command over her own body, was slipping away. It wasn't just a health crisis, it was, in her own words, a crisis of identity. And yet, she chose silence. 4 years, she kept the diagnosis hidden, a decision made alongside her husband Jay Weiss and her agent, who feared the truth would damage her career beyond repair. In the early 1990s, an illness like this wasn't seen with understanding. It was seen as a liability. Studios might hesitate, roles might disappear. And so, in the absence of truth, speculation filled the void. Rumors began to spread, whispers that she was drinking too much, that she had lost control, that the visible changes in her body and performance were the result of personal decline rather than a serious medical condition. What the public saw was a mystery. What they didn't see was the reality, a private battle that was quietly reshaping her life. Kathleen Turner chose to remain silent, even as the rumors grew louder, because telling the truth carried a risk she couldn't afford. In an industry that often preferred to assume excess rather than acknowledge vulnerability, admitting to illness could have meant the end of her career. So instead, she endured both the condition and the speculation. The treatments available in the 1990s for rheumatoid arthritis were harsh, relying heavily on steroids and even forms of chemotherapy. While they helped reduce inflammation, they came with a heavy price: bloating, rapid weight gain, exhaustion, and a mental fog that made even simple tasks more difficult. The physical changes were impossible to hide. Turner's appearance shifted noticeably, and the contrast between the woman audiences remembered from Body Heat or Romancing the Stone and the reality she was living became a subject of public scrutiny. What had once been celebrated, her presence, her physical confidence, was now turned against her, feeding a narrative that was both harsh and deeply misinformed. It's a moment worth reflecting on. The 1990s were an unforgiving era for women in Hollywood, especially those whose appearance began to change in any visible way. The conversation around aging actresses was relentless, often driven by tabloids, late-night punchlines, and a culture that treated women's bodies as something to be constantly judged and dissected. In the middle of that storm, Turner was fighting a very real, very painful battle every single day, quietly, without explanation, because revealing the truth might have cost her everything she had spent years building. Kathleen Turner found herself fighting a battle on two fronts, one visible, one completely hidden. While the public focused on changes they didn't understand, the private reality was far more complex. The toll of rheumatoid arthritis and its treatment was already threatening to derail her life, and yet at the same time, her career was beginning to shift in ways that felt just as unforgiving. In many ways, the role started disappearing faster than she could adapt, leaving her caught between physical limitation and a changing industry that offered little patience. Even before her diagnosis, there had been turning points. In 1990, she passed on the lead role in Ghost, a part that ultimately went to Demi Moore and became one of the year's biggest box office successes. She also declined The Bridges of Madison County, later directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Meryl Streep, to widespread acclaim. At the time, those decisions may have seemed like ordinary career choices, but in hindsight, they marked missed opportunities that only made the coming decline more pronounced. The films she turned down thrived, while the ones she accepted failed to generate the same impact. As her illness progressed, the slowdown became undeniable. She appeared in smaller projects like House of Cards and found some success with John Waters' Serial Mom, but the momentum she once had was gone. Offers became fewer, and the roles themselves began to change. Turning 40 only intensified the shift. Hollywood, already quick to redefine its leading women, started presenting her with parts far removed from the ones that had made her a star. As Turner herself put it plainly, once she reached that age, the leading roles slowed, and what replaced them were offers to play mothers, even grandmothers, a stark contrast to the commanding presence she had once embodied. That shift was, in many ways, Hollywood's default response when an actress moved beyond ingenue roles. For Kathleen Turner, it didn't mean a transition into deeper, more complex leading parts. It meant being pushed to the edges, into supporting roles orbiting younger stars. She adapted where she could, taking smaller projects like A Simple Wish and The Real Blonde, films that demanded less physically but also offered less visibility than the work that had once defined her. Still, there were moments that stood out. In 1999, she appeared in The Virgin Suicides, directed by Sofia Coppola, a quiet, haunting film that explored suburban grief and the disconnect between adults and the inner lives of young women. Her role was small, but it carried weight, signaling a connection to a new generation of filmmakers who understood her legacy. Years earlier, she had also brought her voice to The Simpsons, playing Stacy Lovell, the creator of Malibu Stacy, in the episode Lisa vs. Malibu Stacy. The episode, first aired in 1994, became one of the show's most beloved, adding another unexpected layer to her career. But these roles felt more like distant orbitals than the center of gravity she once occupied. Around the same time, another struggle was intensifying. Turner has spoken candidly about her issues with alcohol, particularly in her 2008 memoir Send Yourself Roses. What had once been manageable had grown into something far more serious, adding yet another layer to a life already shaped by pain, pressure, and profound change. For Kathleen Turner, the drinking didn't begin as recklessness, it began as relief. The pain from rheumatoid arthritis was constant, invasive, and at times unbearable, and alcohol offered a temporary escape. At first, it worked. But as time passed, even when more effective medications became available, the habit remained. What had started as a coping mechanism slowly became a problem of its own. Turner would later admit that while it didn't, in her view, undermine her professionalism on set, it took a real toll on her personal life, straining her marriage, her relationships, and the way people experienced her off-camera. By then, the industry had already begun to pull back. Her changing appearance had made studios cautious, and now there was another reason to keep their distance. The narrative surrounding her grew harsher, often reducing her to a simplistic and unfair image, a former sex symbol in decline, a cautionary tale without a clear lesson. There was a particular cruelty in how she was discussed, as if her story existed only on the surface. The truth, the illness, the limitations of treatment at the time, the impossible position she was navigating, was largely absent from public conversation. As Turner herself once reflected, it seemed easier to let people believe the rumors than to reveal just how ill she truly was. Yet while Hollywood was quietly closing its doors, another world remained open. The stage, where her career had truly begun, offered something different. For Turner, theater was never secondary. It was the foundation, the place where she had trained, where she had first understood her craft. In many ways, film had been the detour. And now, as one path narrowed, the stage began to re-emerge, not just as work, but as something closer to a lifeline. Even at the height of her struggles, Kathleen Turner never fully stepped away from the stage. Throughout the 1990s, she returned to Broadway, finding in theater a space that still welcomed her. In 1995, she appeared in Indiscretions, a production that gave her a strong and fitting vehicle for her talents. Years earlier, in 1990, she had already taken on the role of Maggie in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, earning a Tony Award nomination for Best Actress in a Play, proof that her command of live performance remained as powerful as ever. The demands of theater, while intense, were different from film. Performances were structured, movements carefully controlled and repeated within a set rhythm, something that worked better within the physical limitations imposed by rheumatoid arthritis. It allowed her to adapt, to continue performing without the unpredictability that film productions often required. Then, in 2000, she took on a bold new challenge in London, starring in a stage adaptation of The Graduate as the iconic Mrs. Robinson. The production drew immediate attention, especially after it was announced that Turner, then 45, would appear nude on stage. According to the BBC, ticket sales surged almost overnight. The show became a sustained commercial success, eventually transferring to Broadway in 2002. Critical response, however, was divided. Some reviewers argued that the performance leaned more toward provocation than emotional depth, but the kind that is steady, unglamorous, and real. The kind that doesn't demand attention, but earns respect over time. She endured the setbacks, the misunderstandings, the pain, and she continued. Not unchanged, but unbroken. She endured. And she's still here. The voice is still there. It never went anywhere. And if you watch Body Heat today, or Peggy Sue, or The War of the Roses, you see someone who was genuinely, incomparably herself, a quality that was rare in 1981 and has only become rarer since. That's what Kathleen Turner gave to the movies. And that, no matter what happened after, is what stays. If this story meant something to you, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more stories like this one waiting for you here.